He was a savvy entrepreneur who'd made millions in real estate.
He was sort of a wheeler-dealer.
My dad's business, it was some amazing stuff. He really had a gift for that.
They were sort of living the life.
Anything and everything he could want.
But sometimes everything isn't enough.
There was blood all over the floor. There was glass everywhere.
It's up to investigators to determine, did the millionaire pull the trigger? Or was he the victim of greed and revenge?
She's been taken for a fool.
He was the sole heir as the sole child.
Is there some type of conspiracy here?
Friday, September 30th, 2011. It's a quiet morning in the wealthy seaside town of Jupiter, Florida.
You have some very elite and exclusive communities that are big dollar communities in Jupiter. A full range of mega mansions.
But while most of Jupiter's well-heeled residents are still getting ready for work, a security guard responds to an alarm at the home of real estate developer Lanny Horowitz, his wife Donna, and their son Radley.
Admirals Cove is a private community. It's got an exclusive golf club in it, and they have from townhomes all the way up to the super mansions in there.
It's on the water. It's a strictly gated community. It's monitored. The alarm system from the house would ring through to the gate.
In this residence, there's multiple glass break alarms, which activate when there's vibration, the sound amplitude. In this case, 3 glass break alarms are what tripped the alarm.
The security guard comes to the home. Radley's the one who's, at the door with him, and he describes Radley as being a person who's, groggy, a person when you just encounter them when they're waking up.
He must have been just driving by on a patrol because, he was there incredibly fast. And I let him in the front door, and he went into the bathroom where my dad was.
The shower was running. There was blood all over the floor and the walls.
The glass was on the ground and scattered throughout the room.
On the bathroom floor, covered in blood, is a man the guard recognizes as 66-year-old Lanny Horowitz.
You can see one bullet wound on his side.
He describes, unfortunately, the gargling that we often see when people are very close to death, when they're gasping for air.
As Lanny draws his last breath, the guard rushes to call for help.
Yes, this is Admiral Security calling in to get you a dead person.
Lanny Horowitz's road to success began in Buffalo, New York.
My father got involved with his father at a young age with real estate. He apparently took to real estate like a fish to water.
Lanny was sort of a wheeler-dealer, real estate guy, always kind of looking for the next big real estate deal.
But while real estate was Lanny's passion, his first love was his wife, Donna.
My father was 15 and my mom was 14 at the time. As my father told me, he saw my mom coming down the stairs for the first time at his friend's house. And he knew right then that was the girl he wanted to marry.
She was a very beautiful woman. She was very stunning.
She was very caring and compassionate, but a strong woman.
They hit it off, and the rest is history.
The couple married in 1967, while Lanny was working his way through law school.
He never practiced law, but it was a huge help because when you're a developer, the joke is you're basically a professional defendant.
As Lanny started his professional career, he and Donna started a family.
I was born in 1974. I just remember a lot of snow and a big yard.
Radley was the only child of Donna and Lanny Horowitz.
A few years after Radley's birth, the family left Buffalo behind.
I was 3 years old when the blizzard of 77 hit, and both my parents and a lot of other people at the time decided it was time to go someplace south, a little sunnier, and as my father used to say, where the weather won't kill you. And then we wound up moving to Jupiter, Florida.
They live right on the water. There's full water access to the yacht club, and it's got an exclusive golf club. It's a beautiful community.
In the Sunshine State, Lanny set to work building his real estate empire.
He sort of had his hands in a lot of different pots. He was a businessman. You had cars and real estate, and Lanny had money. They were sort of living the life.
But now, Lanny Horowitz's life has come to a sudden, horrific end.
The call came out initially of a possible shooting incident which had occurred in Admiral's Cove.
It was like something out of a movie, just police and fire trucks and everything. And my mom and I are standing out in the driveway.
While Radley and Donna wait, investigators take stock of the bloody scene inside the mansion's master bath.
The scene is going to tell you what happened in this residence. So we take our time to observe and see what you have and digest what you have and see, is this what it's telling us, or is there something a little bit more to it?
There were no shell casings, and I did see a revolver. It had been moved by one of the security guys. So when he came in to do life-saving techniques, he moved the gun away.
The revolver was initially either near or in Mr. Horowitz's hand.
So the first officers that arrived from the Jupiter Police Department thought that they were responding to a suicide call.
But does the evidence tell a different story?
There's a shower to the right, and there's an obvious bullet impact through the glass door.
Lanny was shot inside that shower. There was blood pattern, cast-off spatter inside the shower. The shower glass had a white towel hanging over it.
You can see a hole through the towel that correlates to the center of where the bullet went through the glass door.
I knew right away it wasn't a suicide. There's no way he would have been able to shoot himself while he's in the shower from outside the shower.
We definitely have a crime scene.
Coming up, was a killer lurking inside Lanny's home?
He told us that it was a tumultuous relationship.
Police in Jupiter, Florida have just found millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz shot dead in his waterfront villa.
Just the fact that a crime occurred there is shocking. A burglary there would be shocking.
The community where this case took place, Admiral's Cove, is a very, very affluent community.
There are numerous amount of gated communities, multi-million-dollar homes.
You're looking at Jaguars, Porsches.
But now, police are looking at a murder.
It was readily apparent that this couldn't have been a suicide.
The bullet came from outside the shower. We don't have a suicide here anymore. We have potentially a homicide here.
Investigators also realized that Lanny had suffered multiple gunshot wounds.
There was so much blood, we couldn't see all of the holes in him until the medical examiner came and started flipping him over and doing what he does. That's when we noticed that there were many bullet holes in his body.
When the blood and the glass are removed and they see where there are 10 shots.
And we knew that the gun that was closest to him in the hallway couldn't have been the only gun unless there had been a reload, because it had a 5-shot capacity.
That's when we started looking for the other firearm.
As you're looking at those 2 bathroom doors, if you take a jog to the left, you then enter into the actual master bedroom, which was, the second gun was actually back down in the bedroom on the dresser.
The second revolver also holds 5 rounds.
It's 2 5-shot revolvers. All 10 shots have been fired.
The guns at the scene, along with other evidence, tell investigators Lanny's killer isn't an intruder.
There's absolutely no way someone else got into that residence. Every single window and door was sealed up.
We also knew that the alarm to the house did not go off until the first shot happened.
They call them glass break alarm, but really the concussion of the trigger being pulled tripped the alarm. And I could tell you exactly to the second when 3 of those rounds were shot.
You'd had to believe that person got into the home without tripping the alarm, committed the murder with guns that belonged specifically to Lanny and Donna, and then exited the home again without tripping the alarm. It just doesn't make sense.
All the evidence points investigators in one direction. Lanny's death was an inside job.
Which means our suspect pool is immediately limited to Donna or Radley.
When investigators approach Donna, she appears too distraught to give them a statement.
Donna's sitting in the front seat of one of their vehicles. She's got her knees up. She's kind of almost like hugging herself. And we introduce ourselves. She never speaks with us, never answers or acknowledges us.
She sort of made motions like, I can't hear you.
And they basically had no further real interaction with Donna.
Investigators are able to speak with Radley, however.
I mean, I was afraid to, ask the cops anything, and I'm like, is my dad okay, And one of the cops just kind of, shook his head but didn't say anything, asked me a bunch of questions and stuff.
I did a gunshot residue test on him, which detects any gunshot residue if he was to have fired the gun.
Then investigators ask Radley to come down to the station for a formal statement.
I appreciate that. You coming in here and all to give a statement. He came and he brought his lawyer, which is his right, and we had no problem with that. Especially the fact that even though he's bringing his lawyer, he was still 100% open with us and spoke with us.
Although, for all his openness, what Radley tells investigators raises plenty of red flags.
They asked if my dad was abusive, I remember that.
Never physical with me. Psychologically, but just petty and nasty, though,
I said, only verbally, only mentally. My dad could be a real needling prick. He had a real way about him.
He described his father as being sometimes abrasive, very short. He told us that it was a tumultuous relationship.
My dad was never warm, effusive, like he used to say, I'm not a warm, effusive person.
Radley also admits that he and his father had suffered a major falling out a few years earlier, after Radley opened a gun shop near Jupiter.
I wasn't making very much money at it, but it was my passion. It was the one thing that I really, really loved, and he had given me some incredibly bad advice with the gun business.
Radley had wanted to order some kind of a kit that could transform a semi-automatic gun to an automatic gun. And according to Radley, he asked his father, who was an attorney, if he believed that it was legal, and his dad told him just order it.
I took his advice, and that did not go very well.
Radley ordered the part and ended up being arrested and convicted and got sentenced to federal prison for some short period of time. But as a result of that, he lost his ability to have the gun shop, and he lost his ability to own or be in possession of a firearm.
It was a shattering experience, to say the least.
But was it motive for murder?
He was very hurt by the firearm situation. He was still sour about that.
Radley, over and over said, hey, listen, I didn't do anything here. I didn't do anything here. I didn't have anything to do with this.
Coming up, investigators put Radley's family ties to the test.
Can't live with him, can't live without him.
Police in Jupiter, Florida, are investigating the murder of millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz. and Lanny's son Radley has just revealed a possible motive.
What Radley told me was he blames going to prison on his dad. And then when he got in trouble, his dad was unsympathetic and basically laughed at him.
Now suspicious of Radley, investigators ask him to walk them through the events surrounding his father's death.
Let's go over again. You tell us in your words what happened that morning. There were lots of little details that he gave us of where he was in the residence, how he woke up.
He was laser focused on every act he did.
What he said was, I got up, couldn't really understand what was going on.
I heard shots, and I don't think I heard any. I pulled out earplug. Those orange ones are pretty good. And screaming. And I got out of bed, and again, I don't know how many. I can't say how many shots I heard, but, and again, if that woke me up or what.
He said, I had orange noise-canceling plugs that you commonly use at the shooting range. He said, I had those in my ear.
Even with the plugs in them, it certainly woke me up.
He said pulling the earplugs out, and that's when I heard the alarm going off. I rushed into my mom's room.
Radley tells investigators that he found Donna outside the bathroom door, apparently distraught with grief.
I just saw like my mom screaming. I went to the bedroom door, and I could see my dad.
Radley said he sees his mom right outside that master suite area screaming and saying he was so mean. He's been saying he would do this. So he assumed this is a suicide. And he said that he could see his father's body laying on the bathroom floor. He said that he then asked his mother, can I get you some water? And he went to the kitchen and got her a bottle of water and gave it to her.
After taking Radley's statement, investigators returned to Admiral's Cove.
We went back in the house to see whether or not we could corroborate some of the things that he was telling us.
Somebody tells us what happens on scene. The point is not what they tell us, but does the evidence support what they're telling us?
There was one earplug he dropped in the hallway as he's going out, and the one was right next to his bed on the bedstand.
When we went back into the bathroom, there was a water bottle on the sink.
Everything that Radley told us, you could corroborate with a piece of evidence. So immediately that tells us, okay, he's being honest.
Radley was very cooperative, answering their questions.
Donna proves far less forthcoming, though.
She didn't give an interview.
Even at the scene, she wouldn't participate and have a general conversation out in the driveway.
She never spoke with any law enforcement directly.
Does that mean Donna has something to hide? Detectives suspect her first words to Radley might contain a clue.
She was, yelling like Radley. It was either he's so horrible or he was so awful. I knew he would do this.
He took that to mean that he committed suicide. In retrospect, who knows what she meant by those words.
Hoping for answers, investigators turned to the rest of Lanny's family.
In speaking with Lanny's sisters, we were able to get all those pieces of the puzzle of their life together.
Investigators learned that behind the millionaire couple's successful facade, their marriage had been struggling for years.
Once I graduated from school, stuff started to change with them, and my mom started to change. He was just always working, and she became resentful of that. And the more and more that my father got involved with it, the more that my mother felt neglected. Was the way that he had described it to me. And my mom told me that they were getting divorced.
Donna and Lanny had been married and then divorced. Then they got remarried and divorced again.
They had first divorced in around 2000, but they got back together and remarried, and it was down at a Justice of the Peace ceremony down in Palm Beach Gardens, just down the road from Jupiter, and I went along for that and got to see my parents married for the second time there. And then they wound up apart again.
However, it wasn't long before the couple reconciled a second time.
They did end up getting back together, and it was a lot of what you hear, just, can't live with them, can't live without them sort of thing.
At the time that this happened, Lanny had invited her into the house so that they could, according to him, be a family unit again.
The way my father announced it to me was, this weekend you'll help your mother move back into the house. And I was like, that's fantastic.
Although, according to Radley, his father had an ulterior motive: Donna's family money.
Donna's mother was very well off. Donna's father had played professional baseball and so had a good deal of money from that.
A couple of business deals hadn't come to fruition, so Lanny was sort of needing some money. The house was expensive to maintain.
She didn't see it as a loan to Lanny. She saw the money more as this is the way that they could live together in the family home.
I didn't know at that point how many mortgages were on the house in Admiral's Cove, but he convinced my mom to get $200,000 from my grandmother, and everything was pretty obvious what was going on.
This was nothing more than a ruse to get the money out of her, and she's been taken for a fool.
But did that mean Donna killed the love of her life?
It was clear that you had a woman who was angry and a woman who was fed up and finally broke.
Coming up, investigators uncover a game-changing clue.
We knew immediately that this was potentially an important piece of evidence.
Detectives investigating the murder of Florida millionaire Lanny Horowitz have narrowed their possible suspects down to two choices: the dead man's wife or his son.
Basically, we knew at that point we were dealing with, was it Bradley Horowitz or Donna Horowitz?
They were the only two people in the house when Lanny was shot.
Both Radley and Donna had compelling motives to pull the trigger. But when the results of Radley's gunshot residue test come in, it suggests he's not the shooter.
Radley had no gunpowder residue on his hands.
Could it have been washed off? Potentially. But I find it very doubtful that someone's going to then, immediately after those alarms are going off and security's already on the way, they're going to go and clean up their hands.
Just to be sure, investigators return to the house and perform a luminol test.
Luminol is a chemical we use to detect small traces of blood, maybe after a cleanup. I actually did it on all the sinks in every bathroom, the kitchen, and I think there was one in the utility room that I did also.
Lanny's sink was indicating of the luminol.
Could that explain Radley's negative test for gunshot residue? Investigators expand their search, looking for additional evidence.
They didn't know what happened. Is he covering for his mom? Did they do it together? Is there some type of conspiracy here between the two?
They further went through the home and they found her journal.
This was a personal journal of Donna's, so we knew immediately that this was potentially an important piece of evidence.
The early entries in Donna's journal reveal a woman happy to rekindle her relationship with Lanny.
It's very hopeful. She talks about how he's reached out and he wants to try again.
However, after Donna returned to Admiral's Cove, the contents of her journals started to change.
It showed her progressively getting more angry and just more upset about certain situations that were occurring.
They basically become very short entries about her daily interactions with Lanny and his lies to her.
There was mention of another woman, and you can tell that Donna didn't like it.
The other woman's name was Francine Tice.
Francine was involved in the real estate industry and was working with Lanny on a few different projects. The two of them were very tight, very good friends and business associates.
She was very, very sharp, very smart, and very much a type A, personality, a go-getter, much like my dad.
It developed into a very close personal relationship.
There was some suggestion that she was a mistress. We didn't really have any evidence to suggest that it was sexual or romantic in nature.
Francine vehemently denied having any sort of sexual relationship with Lanny.
Whether it was true or not, it was true to Donna. Donna absolutely 100% believed that Lanny and Francine were intimate with each other, and she documented in detail in that journal things that would support her belief that this was more than just a friendship.
Her entries in the diary showed, well, he's been with Fran all day. He goes here with Fran. He does this with Fran. It was clear that Fran became a point of contention for Donna.
The journal also makes clear that in the countdown to Lanny's death, Donna's anger of the alleged love triangle came to a head.
Donna said at one point in the journal that as things began to unravel quickly, Lanny said to Donna, "If I knew that Francine felt about me the way I do now, no, I would never have asked you to move back in the house." So she's basically heartbroken. He tells her she's got to move out. And I believe what the straw was, she finds out he's going to North Carolina, this last-minute business trip with Francine, and he tells her in no uncertain terms, you be moved out of the house when I get back.
There was a suitcase in the bedroom right outside the bathroom that was packed for him to leave on his trip that morning.
He was certainly ready to go, and I think that ultimately she said enough. You're not going anywhere. And it was sort of the last act of a woman's scorn.
You could see her getting more upset, getting closer to the date that Lanny was killed.
More and more layers start to pull back. The evidence is inescapable that, she absolutely killed Lanny Horowitz.
There was no question in our mind that this absolutely was Donna Horowitz.
On October 6th, 2011, 6 days after Lanny's murder, investigators placed Donna under arrest.
We had Donna under observation already by this point. Call was made, and they took Donna into custody.
She wasn't interviewed at that time, and she chose not to.
She was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm.
Coming up, will a jury believe that a mild-mannered 65-year-old is capable of murder?
It's not something that society is used to believing, that this upper-class white woman is going to go and just blast her husband 10 times.
Police in the seaside town of Jupiter, Florida, have arrested Donna Horowitz for the murder of her ex-husband, Lanny Horowitz. She's accused of shooting the millionaire real estate developer 10 times on the morning of September 30th, 2011.
Donna Horowitz was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm, and in the state of Florida, that's a mandatory life sentence.
It was clear to us, based on the evidence at the scene, that what took this from a second-degree classic crime of passion to first-degree premeditated murder was the number of the shots.
Premeditation, there's no time limit. It can happen in an instant, as long as it takes the actor to formulate the idea, the thought, the intent to kill.
Her trial begins in January of 2013 at the Palm Beach County Courthouse.
We informed the jury that you're going to learn about this family that lived a nice lifestyle in a beautiful gated community.
Admiral's Cove is a very prestigious, affluent area.
But according to prosecutors, the family's prestige and affluence masked a quiet desperation.
The events that lead to the morning of September 30th are tragic, but as old as time. And basically, to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's going to be clear to you beyond every doubt at the end of this that this was nothing more than a woman who was heartbroken and had had enough.
It was clear that there was tension, and my mom, you could see her losing weight and stuff as everything seemed to sort of be setting in with her over what was happening and what my dad had done.
It was always our position that she killed Lanny because she had a broken heart. You can feel her broken heart in the journal entries. That this was a woman scorned. This was a woman whose world was slipping away.
Prosecutors believe the final break came on the evening of the 30th, when Lanny announced he was leaving town with Francine.
Our supposition is that he's packed all his things and he's going away with Francine, and then she gets told, "You got to be out of the house when I return."
She came to a point of realizing that his behavior wasn't changing and that he was using her.
It was clear that she had been scorned and he had made a fool of her. He probably made fun of her and ridiculed her. And then he gets in the shower and has not a care in the world. And she basically said, enough's enough.
And I think she just snapped. She went into the bathroom, took both the guns, and while he's in the shower, she just unloaded the firearm.
That's the dance of death. Lanny was not standing still as he's getting murdered. He's ducking, he's rolling, he's weaving, and we know this because of the blood spatter everywhere.
She just continues to shoot. I think she was sick of the frustration, sick of all the comments he was making and the lies.
This is somebody whose world is slipping away, and they are outraged, they are hurt, they are upset. And the manner that this was done, the number of shots, this cries a woman scorned. This cries, love gone bad.
However, prosecutors claim that Donna's rage at Lanny didn't prevent her from trying to cover her tracks.
She switched over to that rational thinking pretty quickly, in that she hears the alarm going off and knows that she has to act quickly.
When Radley responded to answer the front door for the security guard, Donna had the opportunity to move the gun or do whatever, manipulate whatever she wanted to manipulate.
She puts one gun in his hand and then wipes down the other gun but puts it in the holster so people won't even draw attention to the fact that that gun could have been used.
Luckily, they recognized pretty quickly that this wasn't a suicide.
But can prosecutors convince the jury that Donna is a killer?
It's not something that society is used to believing, that this upper class white woman is going to go and just blast her husband 10 times.
When Radley takes the stand for the prosecution, his stunning testimony just might be Donna's salvation.
He stood by his mom. He tried to justify actions.
I felt very bad for her. And I said a million times that if there was ever a case for battered spouse syndrome and temporary insanity, this would have been it.
Radley testified and remembered hearing Donna say he was just so horrible. He was just so horrible, sort of repeating that.
Radley never asked his mother if she killed his father. Radley never asked Donna, "Did you kill Lanny?" And the reason he didn't is because he didn't want to hear the answer. He didn't want to be the person who would have to testify and say, "My mother told me she did this."
He would never totally give his mom up. He said, "All I can tell you is it was only two of us there and I didn't do it."
Coming up, Donna repays Radley by committing the ultimate betrayal.
Here comes your mom, you're the person that's supposed to protect you, saying, "You did this."
The prosecution has rested in the murder trial of Donna Horowitz. The 66-year-old is charged with killing her ex-husband, millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz, in the couple's upscale Florida home.
Our position was always that Donna Horowitz was losing everything, and ultimately she decided that she had had enough.
Her frustration and her hatred became so much that she decided that she was going to kill, the love of her life.
When it's their turn, Donna's defense argues that she wasn't the one who wanted Lanny dead.
The defense argued that it was Radley or that Radley had hired someone to do this.
The defense relied on the smudge of a thumbprint maybe or fingerprint on a gate leading out of the house.
Could have been anybody. It could have been one of us. It could have been a firefighter. It could have been a gardener. It could have been some maintenance person. It could have been anybody.
The defense was trying to argue that meant that there was an unknown killer and that this could have been a hitman hired by Radley because he had purchased this paperback collectible edition of some kind of hire hitman or something like that.
Whether he'd pulled the trigger himself or hired someone to do it, the defense argued that Radley had resented his father for years, especially after serving time on federal firearms charges.
The defense was that he was still angry 5 years later about this weapons piece, that he blamed his father for that. He's pissed at his dad for giving him that advice.
Defense dug into every issue that he and his father had ever had, every conflict that he and his father would have had. They questioned him and pushed him on it. It was clear that Lanny was not a supportive father, and every misstep that Radley took, he was critical.
The defense was basically trying to make out that Radley was the angry, disgruntled child, but he also had ulterior motives, potentially for money, for the inheritance from his father.
Radley was getting everything. He was the sole heir to Lanny Horowitz.
He was due to get $500,000 in a life insurance policy.
Donna's defense seems to be going down this road of Radley's the worst person in the world. He must have done it.
I don't believe for a second that Radley ever dreamed they would be that aggressive and vigorous and basically unrelenting, saying that he was the one that did it. Who does that to their own child?
It got hard after you're listening day after day. You did this, when you didn't. And it was a lot for him.
All this stuff that her defense lawyer tried to say, a hitman and all this kind of crap. And he was just trying to do his job. And his job is to get his client off any way that he can.
On January 17th, the jurors retired to consider their verdict. And less than 2 hours later, they announced their decision.
Ultimately, the verdict was returned for second-degree murder with a firearm.
The jury did a great job seeing through the smoke and mirrors and everything that was being portrayed and put out there by the defense.
The judge sentences Donna to 32 years in prison.
Given Donna's age, it's a life sentence, practically speaking.
We were very comfortable with the outcome of it and the sentence as well.
Donna's single-minded pursuit of retribution had not only destroyed her own future, it also devastated the lives of the people she loved most.
Which she did, completely blew her family apart. You certainly can't justify something like that.
In this case, unlike a lot of our cases, there's no good guy or bad guy. There was no winner in this.
Lanny lost his life. Donna will never get out of prison. Radley lost both of his parents. Everybody lost, absolutely. And she didn't have to do that. She could have walked away. She chose not to.
She was kind of trying to still live up to that lifestyle of the affluent Jupiter community, and I think in somewhat denial.
There's been a lot of people in this country that want to present this sort of tremendous success through materialistic things, whether it's a house, whether it's cars, whether it's going on boats. And this is a tragic story where once that veneer was pulled back and there was debt and triple mortgages, then massive stress starts to come in. And people aren't honest with each other. And people don't deal with the issues. They just misdirect them. They bury them. And sometimes they explode.
She was a gorgeous debutante with the world on a string.
She's a beautiful woman in the prime of her life. She really had no enemies.
Her family was well respected, as was she.
Until it was all suddenly taken away.
It was bad, you know. Beautiful entranceway to a beautiful townhome, and there she's laying covered in blood and roses.
This was a hit. This was an orchestrated hit.
The investigation would take detectives from a quiet bedroom community in Atlanta to the mansions of Palm Beach, Florida, to expose a killer desperate to be part of high society.
There's old money down there in Palm Beach. It's the rich and the famous.
I remember going to parties where there were bowls of cocaine.
When you have a lot of money, you can buy your way out of a lot of different things.
Friday, January 16th, 1987. It's a quiet morning in Atlanta's exclusive Buckhead neighborhood when shots ring out along a row of townhouses.
The police were called, and they responded almost immediately.
Officers arrived to find the door of one of the homes left open. Inside the foyer is the body of a 35-year-old woman. She's been shot twice in the head at point-blank range.
There was a box of roses in the foyer near 2 spent 9mm shell casings and a big pool of blood.
Shootings are uncommon in this upscale community, but police are even more surprised when the victim is identified as socialite Lita McClinton Sullivan.
Lita was such a sweet woman. She was very attractive, tall, beautiful smile, and very warm and very caring.
It really made no sense. She lived in a very nice part of town. She was doing all the right things as a human. She was a great human being. Why would someone want this beautiful woman in the prime of her life who was good to everyone? Why would they want him dead?
Born January 7th, 1952, Lita McClinton grew up among Atlanta's social elite.
She came from a very well-to-do family. Her mother was a state representative, and her father worked for the Federal Department of Transportation. Very upscale, white-collar people. And they lived in an old section of Atlanta, DeKalb County, Georgia. She attended college in the Atlanta area. I believe it was Spelman College.
She did go through debutante training and was a debutante and was a very elegant, beautiful, well-educated woman.
As a socialite, the next logical step was to find a suitable husband. But instead, Lita focused on building a career in fashion.
She just loved the retail business and fashion. And I think her aspiration was to run her own store one day. She was so busy that she was not dating. I never met anybody. Maybe she was just quiet about it and very private.
That all changed the day 34-year-old James Sullivan walked into her life in 1975.
Jim Sullivan was from the Boston area of Massachusetts. He grew up kind of scrappy and hard, for lack of a better term. But he inherited a great deal of money when his uncle died and left him a few liquor stores. The liquor store business drew him to Macon, Georgia, and eventually from Macon, he made his way to Atlanta, which is how he ended up meeting Lita.
Throughout that time period, he became friendly with a lot of the Atlanta socialites.
And he charmed her, evidently, in the store, and they started to date, and she was kind of head over heels.
According to Lita's friends, despite the 11-year difference in age, it was a classic case of opposites attract.
He had money, but was a little rough around the edges and came from Boston, which couldn't be more different than Atlanta, Georgia, especially during that time frame.
He was a terrible dresser, and I know that Lita changed that by just suggesting his ways.
He was also very thrifty, so it was a hard job, but she got it done.
She loved that man, and there was something about him that appealed to her. Maybe it was the difference that drew her to him, but there's no logical explanation behind it. But I think the love between her and him was real.
After dating for only a year, Lita and Jim got married in 1976, settling into his house in Macon together. But Jim wanted more for himself and his new bride. He was a social climber who had his sights set on the exclusive island enclave of Palm Beach, Florida.
It's a very influential, very affluent area of Florida. It has lots of money, a lot of socialites.
And Jim had already found the perfect place. Casa Isleta, a historic beachside villa just down the road from Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort.
When Jim bought that big house, everybody noticed. And everybody wants to know who bought that house because it's right on South Ocean Boulevard. It's a beautiful Italian house. Lita thought that she could be very happy. I mean, what's not to love about beautiful homes? And it's a pretty place. I remember their first party where Alan and I were invited. The invitation came in a big piece of chocolate, hand-delivered, with the invitation, with the address and all that. He wanted to impress people in Palm Beach. It was his coming out party.
Around the same time, the couple bought a new townhouse in Atlanta. And for nearly a decade, the couple would split their time between Palm Beach and Buckhead.
She's an Atlanta girl through and through, so Lita wanted to come back home.
They bought a townhouse maybe a mile from where I lived, so I saw her often. But that was Lita's home base, and they went back and forth to Florida.
It seemed as though Lita was getting the best of both worlds, thanks to her husband.
I remember he bought her a Bentley, and I remember Lita would drive it, and then we would all jump in, and it was really a lot of fun. We'd go down Peachtree riding, like 6 of us all riding in this convertible. It was really fun.
She was happy, frequently seeing her family again and her friends, and was enjoying everything that life had for her at age 35.
But when Lita answered her doorbell that January morning, it all came to a bloody end. Now she lies dead in the foyer of her Midtown getaway, and investigators want to know why.
She wasn't a high-risk victim. She didn't do anything that would cause her to become a victim of a violent crime, such as this.
The first thing you ask yourself is, why is this person dead? Who wants this person dead? What is this murder all about?
Coming up, Lita's loved ones say her marriage wasn't everything it appeared to be.
When people knocked on the door, they thought that she was the housekeeper.
35-year-old socialite Lita Sullivan has been murdered at her townhouse in Buckhead. Given its high-profile nature, the Atlanta Police Department puts its most decorated detectives on the case.
The lead detective was Welcome Harris, who was himself an icon of the civil rights movement and a very talented homicide detective and also a native Atlantan, who was one of the lead detectives on the Atlanta missing and murdered children's cases.
Early analysis of the crime scene indicates this isn't an attempted robbery, but an orchestrated murder.
There was a box of roses in the foyer near 2 spent 9mm shell casings and a big pool of Lita's blood.
It wasn't a burglary. The person didn't come in and ransack the house afterwards. The person came to the door. When she looked, it was just flowers that she could see. She opened the door, and he shot her, point blank.
And so good morning was the last thing that Lita ever said. This was a hit. This was an orchestrated hit. She was lured to the door with flowers so that she could be shot in the head.
One of Lita's neighbors says he heard the gunshots, and when he looked outside, he caught a glimpse of the possible shooter.
There was a flower delivery individual. That individual shot and killed Miss Sullivan, and thereafter fled the area.
He was able to give a general description to the Atlanta Police Department, and they were able to do a composite sketch.
But if this was a professional hit, who sent the gunman? And why? Detectives' first call is to Lita's husband, Jim Sullivan.
James Sullivan was in Palm Beach, Florida, at Casa Lita when Lita was murdered.
He is shocked by the news and says he couldn't imagine who could ever want to hurt her. But Lita's devastated parents tell police there were plenty of people who wished her harm. In fact, that's one of the reasons why she'd gotten the house in Buckhead to begin with.
When Lita moved to Palm Beach, it was in the middle of the 80s, of 1980s. Palm Beach was a very white Anglo-Saxon place. If you go to some of the big parties, there are no black people.
The only time you see people of color are the landscape people and the butlers and things like that. It's an island full of mansions, and it's very exclusive.
She was having a hard time. She told me quite a few times that people were rude to her when she walked into a store. They were sort of surprised, like, who are you? And why are you here? Lita was not happy in Palm Beach. She felt like she wasn't treated, so she kept on coming back to Atlanta.
However, Lita's parents say that what concerned them most was the way James had handled the discrimination. When Lita told him she was unhappy, he didn't seem to care.
Like, what'd you bring me here for? I can feel it, I can sense it. I'm not welcome here. This isn't my world.
He didn't worry about Lita. He didn't listen that when people knocked on the door, they thought that she was the housekeeper. He didn't care about that.
On Palm Beach, they kind of excluded her from all the other things that were going on in Palm Beach, and he wanted to become a force in Palm Beach.
He wanted to impress people in Palm Beach. He wanted to take Palm Beach by storm.
I don't think that James Sullivan was welcomed as much as he probably wanted to be. He was trying to work his way into that, and I don't know if that worked out as well as he wanted.
Now you got two strikes against you. You're a white guy who's not blue blood money, you're more blue collar money, and you're married to an African American woman.
Lita's loved ones say that his behavior confirmed what they already suspected about the marriage.
There was tension in between James and his wife. We had received the same information that she had left and come back to the Atlanta area.
She didn't share a lot, but you could tell sometimes that she was by the sound of her voice, or when she'd call and say, let's get together. It was a hard time for her.
And it seems there was another reason for the split as well.
It would get back to me that he would be having lunch with some other woman at the Ritz-Carlton.
Lita Sullivan caught him having an affair, was sleeping with somebody in Palm Beach, and that was the last straw. He would embarrass her. She was ridiculed for being a black woman in Palm Beach, and that was the last straw. That's when she moved back to Atlanta.
When Jim started attending parties by himself, Lita had already made the decision that she was not staying.
Coming up, could Lita's murder be connected to her impending divorce?
The divorce was coming, but she hadn't yet dealt and told everybody. I mean, people knew, but it was a hard time for her.
Detectives investigating the murder of Lita Sullivan have a promising lead. It seems her marriage to millionaire James Sullivan was in trouble, after she'd discovered he'd been cheating on her.
Palm Beach was where their relationship began to dissolve.
We invited him and Lita over for a small party we were having, and Lita and I were in the library, and Jim was in the living room, and he was asking another guest who was there to go out on a date with him. I think he just thought he could get away with anything.
The police soon discovered that infidelity is only one of James' many flaws.
I learned from her mother that, that they didn't like Jim Sullivan from the beginning. That there's just something about him.
I personally thought he was a phony, and he was a big talker and a big show-off.
I don't know if anybody that was close to him, or if he had any really close friends, well, other than the women that he ran around with. He was very fond of prostitutes, and he did his own selfies long before our smartphones. He would just put a tripod up and take pictures of himself with these prostitutes and swimming in the pool and such. So he just wasn't a good person.
In the months leading up to Lita's murder, one of James' affairs had apparently become serious.
He became sort of like a couple with this Asian woman, Suki, who then became his date.
Suki and Sullivan began a relationship while he was still married to Lita. And after he and Lita separated, he began pursuing Suki seriously.
For Lita, it was the final straw. Soon after, she filed for divorce, but was gunned down before it could be finalized.
Lita came back to Atlanta and was living in Buckhead. And on the day of her murder, on January 16, 1987, there was a hearing scheduled in Fulton County Superior Court at 2 p.m. where the judge was going to make a final decision on their divorce. Lita had sought to invalidate the terms of their prenuptial agreement and was seeking a settlement. So that's what was on the table on the day that she was murdered.
The timing is incredibly suspicious, but James insists he had nothing to do with his wife's death. He and Lita signed a prenuptial agreement before their wedding 10 years prior, which means he had no financial motive. He thinks Lita was killed because she was living a dangerous double life of her own.
When Lita was killed, what his attorney and Jim made the public believe was that she was in drugs, that it was a drug deal, that it was an old boyfriend that got mad. They tried to ruin Lita's reputation.
Their angle was that it was drug dealers that did it, that she was involved with drugs, and that Jim Sullivan had nothing to do with it.
To Lita's loved ones, the idea that she could have been involved with drugs is ridiculous.
Oh my gosh, Lita didn't even hardly drink. She never did drugs. No.
The accusation adds to the tabloid nature of the story and earns James some new support.
Here in Palm Beach, they didn't really know Lita. They didn't know who her family was, so they basically came to his defense because they didn't know any better. Everything in the news that was printed and on television was that it was her fault. I mean, that's what happens to women. Even after we're dead, we got to prove that we're a nice person.
The media frenzy over the case winds up producing a new lead. Investigators get a tip about 3 suspicious men spotted at a motel near Lita's townhouse the day she was murdered.
They were able to track the killers back to this Howard Johnson motel that they had been in the day before.
And there's witnesses see 3 guys acting weird and getting in a car. It was a rental car, I think. And, they went to the flower store.
When investigators show the motel tipster the composite sketch, it's a match. On the hotel registry, they discover the 3 men had used fake names. However, phone records indicate they made several phone calls. All of them were to a number in Palm Beach, Florida.
They were in Howard Johnson's hotel room, 302, and there was a phone call from that hotel room to Jim Sullivan's house in Palm Beach. And the duration of the call was like 2 minutes or something.
It's enough to convince detectives that James Sullivan has been lying to them about his involvement in his wife's murder. But they still need proof.
It was a circumstantial evidence case. Jim Sullivan didn't pull the trigger. He was in hundreds of miles away in Palm Beach at the time.
Coming up, investigators get some help from an unexpected source.
They're getting divorced down here. She tells these stories like, I'm afraid of the guy.
Four months into their investigation, Atlanta police are zeroing in on a suspect in the murder of Lita Sullivan. They believe her estranged husband, James, may have hired a group of hitmen to kill her. James insists that their prenup means he had no motive, but detectives learn that might not have been the case.
She was trying to bust the terms of their prenuptial agreement in order to obtain more of his money that she felt that she was entitled to. He was not only adamantly opposed to it, but was very vocal in his strategy of scorched earth, that if he had to burn all of the assets before she got him, he would be willing to do that.
He didn't think he should have to share anything with Miss Sullivan through the divorce and was trying to preserve his wealth by having her murdered.
If the court ruled in Lita's favor, James stood to lose over $1 million.
She wanted to keep the townhouse in Atlanta. She wanted her car, which was a little two-seater Mercedes, which was not a new car, and she wanted her jewelry. But Jim wanted the jewelry, he wanted the townhouse, and he wanted the car. He wanted everything. He wanted her to walk away with nothing. It was worth $1 million, the settlement. That's all it was.
However, motive is only one piece of the puzzle. Other than a few suspicious phone calls, investigators don't have any solid evidence linking him to the crime. And as the months go on, the chances of finding that proof grow further out of reach.
The Atlanta Police Department in 1987 looked high, looked low, did everything they could in an attempt to solve Lita's murder and could not. They couldn't piece it together.
It was nothing that the Atlanta police did or didn't do that caused the case to go cold. I mean, I think they did an excellent job from the onset. There was a lot of obstacles, and there was no cooperation, obviously, from Jim Sullivan.
In the meantime, James has continued to climb the social ladder in Palm Beach.
After Lita was murdered, he was free, of course. So not only did he not have to pay Lita anything after she was murdered, but he was free to marry Suki.
She was enamored with him because he came across the same way he did with Lita, charming.
But in 1989, a routine traffic stop would cause him to lose it all.
He was driving the car, it was the Mercedes or the Rolls Royce or whatever, but he was involved in a minor traffic accident.
He's not supposed to be driving. He doesn't have a license. The tag's on his car. He's so cheap he doesn't even keep the tags current. So he gets a couple citations. He goes to court. The cop doesn't show up. So he gets Suki to testify, Your Honor, I was driving. So they threw the case out. Well, wouldn't you know, a Palm Beach Post reporter, he's in court that day because he's kind of watching Sullivan too. He gets back to his office and calls the police officer and says, hey, I know you didn't come to court today, but Sullivan had his wife testify that she was driving. He had her stand up in court and swear under oath. Now the cop's hot, so he goes to the state attorney and they start this investigation.
They wind up convicting him of perjury, and he takes a plea, and he was restricted to house arrest for, I guess, a year.
At the same time, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has obtained a warrant to search James and Suki's home.
GBI came down here. He sees a gun in the house. He gets charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon.
They found 4 weapons. One was sort of shotgun, which he was not permitted to have while under house arrest.
The gun charge, as well as Suki's false testimony, gives detectives some new leverage in their murder investigation.
They charged Suki with perjury. Now she's freaking out because she's got a felony charge, and so now they're really split.
She just felt like that was just wrong. She didn't do anything, and he was the one that should, face the court.
In 1990, Suki files for divorce and agrees to testify against James. She winds up giving investigators more than they could have ever hoped for.
She says Sullivan basically didn't confess, but said Lita's murder is good for us, which is kind of unusual, you know, telling a woman, my wife was murdered, and it's going to be good for us.
That exclamation caused an intense national publicity.
With Suki's sworn testimony, prosecutors have what they need to present their case against James Sullivan to a grand jury.
He was arrested shortly after that point.
Coming up, charging a multimillionaire with murder is one thing. Convicting him is another.
He hired a big-time Washington, D.C. lawyer, and they shut us down.
Five years after the murder of Lita Sullivan, investigators have finally arrested her ex-husband James for planning the crime.
The feds had indicted Sullivan for interstate commerce for committing a crime, namely using the phones to set up this hit, murder. The main witness at the 1992 federal trial was Suki Sullivan. Suki doesn't want to take the hit for him anymore.
But as the trial begins in June of 1992, it quickly becomes clear that their case still isn't strong enough. James has hired an expensive and effective legal team who turned the testimony of his latest ex-wife into a disaster for the prosecution.
Upon cross-examination, she fell apart. They didn't have enough to really nail her, but they had enough to dirty her up really badly, that she was just out to get money from Sullivan.
She pretended that she wasn't understanding or able to read English. She pretended that she was frightened of Mr. Sullivan. And those pretensions by her turned out to be completely false, at least from the court's perspective when the court entered the final judgment.
He was acquitted by a judge. It was a directed verdict in federal court. And he was free after that and just remained at large.
Even if James did hire hitmen to get rid of Lita, it looks like he's going to get away with it. But Lita's well-connected parents decide to take matters into their own hands with a civil lawsuit.
They were looking to sue Sullivan for wrongful death. I think they were a little frustrated with the Atlanta prosecutors. And so we spoke for a while, and I said I'd be happy to take it on. I'm not a lawyer, so I got a good friend of mine who was practicing civil law at the time, Brad Morris, to take a look at it.
James doesn't seem to take the suit seriously, choosing to skip the high-priced lawyers this time.
He fired his attorney and he defended himself.
Mr. Sullivan determined that he would represent himself before the jury and argue his own defense as to why the issues brought by the estate of Lita Sullivan should not be accepted by the jury.
The move immediately backfires.
We go to court and, we really smoked the guy.
There was a judgment against Mr. Sullivan on behalf of the estate of Lita Sullivan for approximately $6 million.
While James has been found legally responsible for his wife's death, it still doesn't guarantee justice.
Lita's parents won a judgment against him, wrongful death. He never paid it. He never ever had any intention of paying 1 cent to anybody.
He was hiding money all over the place. They never collected a penny because they couldn't find it.
He was a criminal. That's how he was brought up. And he was a nasty man.
For the next several years, no criminal charges are placed for Lita's murder, and James Sullivan's notoriety continues to grow.
He always wanted to be in the newspapers, on TV, be talked about. Well, guess what? His wish came true, because now he's in the papers, he's on TV, he's being talked about, and not in a good way.
However, the national publicity would eventually provide detectives with a new lead.
Years later, I think it was America's Most Wanted, did a TV show based on the murder of Lita Sullivan.
In 1998, a woman named Belinda called the GBI and said that she had some information about the murder of Lita in Atlanta in 1987.
She's watching this show and she sees his picture and says, "Oh my God, this guy gave my ex-boyfriend a bag of cash."
She's living in Texas, hasn't seen Harwood in years. He knocks on her door and said, "Oh, I'm just passing through Texas and I thought I'd say hello." This was right after the America's Most Wanted had the Lita murders case on television. This woman had also seen that show. She is wigged out. She thinks Harwood's going to kill her.
For investigators, this cold case has suddenly heated back up.
One of the things that we all had a duty to do was to make sure that she was telling us the truth. And in order to do that, you have to corroborate and investigate every aspect of what she told us. And the GBI, they teamed back up with the Atlanta Police Department. One of the things that she told them was that Tony Harwood had met Jim Sullivan when he was working as a mover for a trucking company. So they went to that company and they were able to locate the original contract from November of 1986, where Tony Harwood, in fact, moved some furniture into Jim Sullivan's home in Palm Beach.
Investigators quickly tracked down Tony Harwood in North Carolina. To their surprise, he seems to be waiting for them.
When they knocked on the door, he said something like, "I was wondering what took you so long."
He admitted to them that he met Jim Sullivan and that Jim Sullivan had hired him to kill his estranged wife and offered to pay him $25,000 to kill Lita. He confirmed that he was in Atlanta at the time that Lita was murdered, but he denied ever pulling the trigger and instead blamed another individual. After they were able to corroborate not only what Belinda said, but what Tony Harwood said with independent evidence, contracts, phone records, other witnesses, they then issued an arrest warrant for Jim Sullivan.
He was re-indicted in Fulton County for the murder of Lita Sullivan.
In most cases, double jeopardy would prevent James from being tried again for the same crime. But it seems he's unwilling to take that chance.
When they attempted to bring him in, Jim Sullivan had already gotten word that there was a warrant for his arrest, and he fled.
He took his passports and left. He got out of the U.S.
Coming up, an international manhunt begins, with James one step ahead of investigators.
He fled from Florida to Costa Rica, and from Costa Rica, he went on a worldwide tour.
An accomplice's confession has given prosecutors another chance to convict James Sullivan. But before he can be arrested, James flees the country. The search continues for several years, but James continues to evade capture. So in 2002, the FBI tries enlisting the aid of the public.
At that time, America's Most Wanted was very popular. We used them as a very good investigative tool to assist us in trying to find people. That night that it was featured, I was there at America's Most Wanted answering phone calls. We started getting a lot of phone calls saying he's in Thailand.
Thailand police immediately placed James under arrest, but the wheels of international justice turn slowly. It takes 2 more years for James to be extradited back to the United States. In the meantime, prosecutors used the delay to prepare their case.
We did everything we could to round up the witnesses, interview the witnesses, prepare the witnesses, prepare our physical evidence, make sure we had everything tested and everything investigated. We had to go about finding people and interviewing people who hadn't spoken of her murder for years, decades. Tony Harwood entered into a negotiated plea with the state of Georgia, and what he agreed to do was to serve 20 years in prison for his role in the death of Lita in exchange for testifying against Jim Sullivan at trial.
It probably prevented him from getting the death penalty.
When James arrives in 2004, his attorneys immediately file a motion to dismiss the charges. It goes all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court for a decision.
He tried to block his trial by saying double jeopardy, that the federal government had prosecuted him for this crime already and he had been acquitted, and therefore the state of Georgia could not try him for this crime. He lost that appeal to the Supreme Court.
In 2006, 19 years after Lita was assassinated, James Sullivan finally stands trial in Georgia. Although prosecutors have first-hand testimony from one of the hitmen James hired, the defense argues that there is no actual evidence he was involved.
We could never place any firearms, at least a 9mm in Harwood's possession. Never got any hits back on the shell casings. He says that, he threw it out the window for the guy. I think he said his name was Bob or something.
The defense blamed it all on Tony Harwood. Basically, Harwood is a liar, and you can't believe anything he has to say, and the state just didn't prove their case. And they're just blaming Sullivan because he's the usual suspect, the estranged ex-husband.
But the state's case proves strong enough to prevent James from escaping for a second time.
Ma'am, would you publish the verdict?
It took the jury a few hours to deliberate.
We, the jury, find the defendant, James Vincent Sullivan, guilty of malice murder.
And find Jim Sullivan guilty of Lita's murder. Then the jury affixed the penalty at life without the possibility of parole.
Everybody was elated, especially the family, all the people that worked so hard on the investigation, the Atlanta Police Department, the GBI, everybody that was involved with this.
When I heard the verdict, I thought that show-off of a man who only talked about all the places he had and he lived and the clothes he had, now is going to have to spend the rest of his life in this prison, in this beat-up old uniform.
It seems a fitting end for such a notorious social climber. The same callousness and greed that drove James to have Lita killed wound up putting him in jail for the rest of his life.
Jim killed Lita because he couldn't part with 1 cent. She was not going to get that condominium, that car, and the jewelry. It was just power. It was just power and greed. That's all. She was not going to win.
Justice was
wonder if I could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here we go, going back on the road. back on the road now. Here I go, going back on the road. With you back there again, play the music back there again. I saw the looking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. If I could read my love now, baby, you make.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, baby, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. I did not come this far for any stronger. All of a sudden there was nothing left. Well, last night a doctor thought you were lying. I never meant to keep you alive. There might be stuff we said that's